In case you haven't heard already, our board recently made a decision to pursue construction of a new high school, a fourth comprehensive high school in the school district. And in conjunction with that, to reconfigure our grade levels to grades K-5 elementaries, 6-8 middle schools, 9-12 high schools. And with that, there would be boundary adjustments that would impact a fair swath of the district. And so to give an idea of sort of why that is, the big issue that's driving all of this is enrollment growth that we are seeing in the north and central corridor of the district. And it's pretty substantial. If any of you live up there or you have reason to go up there because of your kids' activities or you have friends up there, it went from virtually nothing, you know, after the economic collapse in 2008 to about 18 months ago, all of a sudden, you know, houses begetting houses, and it's coming even more rapidly. So we really have to look at what are we going to do in the short term, which I would say is sort of now, because we do have issues in many of our schools now, midterm over the next, you know, 3 to 5 years, and then longer term solution 5 years and beyond. So first of all, I want to just give you an idea of why we're seeing this kind of growth. So this is kind of a busy map. The pink horizontal line on the bottom is the Snohomish-King County line. The white lines are the boundaries of our district and the service area boundaries of schools that are represented by the push pin. So you can see Lockwood, Shelton View, Frank Love, Crystal Springs, Canyon Creek, Fernwood, and then Kokanee back over in the corner here. So this is really the area of the district that is presenting significant growth challenges for us right now. That green scraggly vertical line there is what's called the urban growth boundary. So way back in the early 1990s, the state passed this thing called the Growth Management Act. And the intent of the Growth Management Act is that it basically programs in large-scale, dense residential development into defined areas. So that roads, infrastructure, sewer, water, electricity, employment, all of those things are condensed into more urbanized areas. So if you could see this in a clean picture, what you'd see on the west side of that line, the left side of that line, is lots of housing, lots of neighborhoods, lots of development. What you see on the east or the right side of that line is lots of open space. And that is all by design and intent of government. And so what we're seeing now is in the urbanized areas up there, neighborhoods of hundreds and hundreds of new houses being built. Eventually, over time, that green line is going to shift. The counties analyze it every 10 years or so, and that line is going to move slowly east. This is also the reason why we don't see large-scale development on the east side of our school district anymore, because the rules changed, and you can't put large-scale developments on that part of the district because they're on the wrong side of that urban growth boundary. So to give you an idea of where we're at with some of our schools, Canyon Creek Elementary in that part of the district, these are November numbers. They're sitting at 768. You can see Fernwood, Kokanee, Crystal Springs, Skyview, almost 900 students. Canyon Creek, to put in perspective, is now larger than half of our junior high schools in the district. Fernwood and Kokanee, they'll crest 700 students in a year or two. And Crystal Springs, if you're familiar with that campus, is one of our older elementary schools. It's on a very small campus. We placed some additional portable classrooms on that campus this summer, and we cannot get permitted to put any more classroom space on that campus. So they are essentially maxed out. Once all of that classroom space is occupied, our alternatives are going to be shipping students off to other locations where we have more room for them. This is just a little visual. This is Canyon Creek in the morning, kids coming in. It's not all 768 of them, but you can get an idea. You're secondary folks. That looks a familiar look. You're probably saying, what's the big deal with that one? So when you look kind of patterns in the district, that northern area of the district is sort of the historic and projected area that we're going to continue to see residential growth because of the reasons I just talked about. Down in your area of the district, this area is more built out. And so we see more either static enrollment or, as you've experienced at Inglemoor the last few years, actually declining enrollment. Same on the east side of the district, again, mostly because of the limitations on new residential development in that part of the district. When we look up north, and we're in the process of getting this information updated. This is a bit dated, but this shows how many new housing developments or how many new housing units are in some stage of planning or development in that area of the district. And so you can see Fernwood is the big winner with about 1,100. And I think that's probably going to be much more than that when we get this updated, because we've gotten information on some new housing developments that are being proposed. So we've got about 3,300 new housing units just impacting those schools that are listed there in some stage of development. The relationship between new housing and enrollment we can track pretty closely historically in the school district. So for single-family units, single-family homes, we get about 50 new students for every 100 homes. For multifamily units, apartments, condominiums, we get about 10 for every 100 units. And so, back up to 3,300 here and kind of do the math. And obviously that's not all going to come at one time. It's going to come over many, many years, but you can see what the pipeline of new students in the north end of the district is looking like. And those are district averages, and we suspect that with the price points of the homes in that area of the district and the kind of housing that's being built up there, that those averages may actually be a little higher in that portion of the district. So back in 2001, the school board adopted policy 9400, the Enrollment Demographics Task Force policy. This is a standing task force of superintendent and school board appointed staff members, community members, and parents. And their job is basically to study these ongoing demographic trends and changes across the district and to make recommendations to the board on what actions we should take to address those. They have a number of criteria that they use as they analyze options, and the most important one on their list obviously being instructional equity, that wherever you're a student in the Northshore School District, you have a similar opportunity at a great education. So short to midterm solutions, and these are being implemented now in some various stages, and I would put these in the 1 to 5 year, are additional portable classrooms. As I mentioned, we placed a number of additional portables at these schools last year. We're putting about 10 more across this region in the coming months. We can restrict in and out of district waivers, so try and reduce the opportunity for students who don't live in that region of the district to attend schools there. We can relocate programs. We did this a few years ago where we moved the PACE program out of Kokanee, consolidated 4 programs to 3, and that opened up classroom space at Kokanee. And when all else fails and we no longer can exercise any of those top 3 options, we're down to busing. And that means putting kids on school buses, potentially driving them past their neighborhood school to attend a school someplace else in the district that has room for them. The longer-term recommendations by the EDTF were 2, and they prioritized them. And their top priority was that the school board would decide to build a new high school, reconfigure grade levels. Their secondary recommendation, if the EDTF, if the board couldn't swallow that one, was to build a new elementary school. Either one of those options would involve boundary adjustments as well to balance enrollment across schools. So the board on October 23rd unanimously approved the number 1 recommendation. And just a caveat, there is no money right now to build a new high school. There is no money right now to build a new elementary school. Either one of those would be dependent on a future bond. So we're hoping that in February 2014, in that bond we run, we can get the funding to move this plan forward. So why a new high school? And I think that after the board deliberated on this a great deal, where they landed is really on the educational benefits of grade reconfiguration. That wherever you are in the school district, whether you're in the north end or not, grade reconfiguration would be an advantage to students. Right now, the world from a curriculum and a standard standpoint and assessment standpoint is all aligned K-5, 6, 8, 9, 12, and we're not. And we recognize some of the challenges every day associated with that. We're transporting almost a third of our ninth graders every day up to high school to get courses that they can't get at the junior high because that's the right thing to do. We want to make sure that they have the opportunities they need, primarily in advanced math, world languages, those types of things that you see those students every day, many of you probably in your classrooms. We also know that by 6th grade, many of our students, particularly in the areas of math, are starting to separate themselves a little bit. Some of our schools, we have the advantage of an elementary school right next to a junior high school where we can send a student, across the way to get a course that maybe they're ready for that we can't accommodate at elementary, but that doesn't exist for all of our elementary schools in the district. All the opportunities we have for course offerings, et cetera. It was interesting, we were meeting with a group of students at Bothell High School earlier this week and asked them how many, when you were a ninth grader, got bused up to high school, and a number of them raised their hands and asked, how many of you would have gone up to the high school, there's something you would have been interested in taking, but you just didn't want to leave your junior high? And a number of hands went up too. So we know that we're already taking a third up there, and there's probably even more who would avail themselves of opportunities at the high school if they could. And finally, the last one, and I'm sure this is a familiar one to all of us, our ninth graders don't often know they're in high school because they're not, physically. They're in junior high. And so pretty much any district, whether it's Bethel or Lake Washington or any of the big districts that have recently made the conversion, that's been a part of their conversation as well, as how do we make sure ninth graders know that they're in high school and what they're doing in ninth grade counts. Northshore and Puyallup, we are the lone large districts left in the state that still maintain our configuration. We know right now that as this elementary growth, and most of the growth we're seeing right now is at elementary, not all of it, but it's more at elementary than at the upper grades. It's eventually going to move its way through the system. Right now, it's all primarily programmed into the Bothell pathway. And there's just not the capacity at Bothell High School to be able to serve all of those students. By reconfiguring grades, taking 6th graders out of elementary, that's going to extend the life of some of those elementary schools by removing that grade level. And as you saw earlier, this is also a densely populated and rapidly growing area of the district, so it makes some sense to have a high school centrally located in that area. So again, this deals with elementary overcrowding really in two ways. One is, as I mentioned, removing 6th graders, and then the second is through the boundary adjustment process. So taking some of the service areas of the impacted schools, shrinking those service areas, and then moving some of that service area to other schools. And I've got some maps I'll show in a bit that give some idea what that might look like. Skyview Junior High, what's going to be the solution for Skyview? Again, Skyview is going to be addressed through the boundary adjustment process, similar to the elementaries. So, what about school consolidation? We have a number of elementary schools, particularly on the east side of our district, that have been declining for a number of years. We have a couple of schools right now that are around 300, 325 students. They're projected to get even smaller. You take 6th grade out of those schools and they're going to get even smaller than that. Definitely an issue that we need to address. The board has not made any decision on school consolidation. The EDTF did recommend that the board consider school consolidation if they opted for the new high school and grade reconfiguration option. The reality is we know that those small schools are going to get even smaller with or without grade reconfiguration. They're going to get even smaller with grade reconfiguration. We've got to look at the instructional viability of those small schools, and we have to do some more analysis for the board before they'll be ready to make any kind of decision on that. Long term, how does this plan address elementary growth? And a lot of that will depend on the pace of construction. Our hope is that this plan would extend the life of the elementary schools, particularly in the north part of the district, into the next decade. Likely we will still need at some point, though, a new elementary school in that portion of the district, either as part of our 2018, 2022, or 2026 bond. But addressing secondary growth now creates the educational benefit for all students, it provides a longer lasting solution, and it doesn't add space at our level at which we're most over capacity. So said a different way, we have plenty of elementary classrooms in our school district, We just don't have them in the right places. We need them up north, and we have them east. So looking at a high school site, we actually have a site that we purchased this last spring. It is directly north and west of Fernwood Elementary. It's a 61-acre site. We call it the Gomer property. That's the family name that we purchased it from. If you're familiar with this area at all, the red line at the top is 180th. That's the northern border of the school district. The line that would go onto the west side of the property there, that's 35th Avenue. So that's that main road that comes down into Bothell and then shoots up into Mill Creek. So that's the site right there. If you look at, actually this is a fairly recent Google Earth, you see that big kind of brown patch down on the bottom left side of Fernwood there. That's 529 new houses that the earth is being scraped to prepare for. So estimated costs, a new high school, we estimate right now about $120 million. That's in today's dollars. You know, obviously, depending on when we construct, there would be inflation or escalation with that. Estimated annual operating costs of a high school are about $1.75 million. That's, you know, Vicki, Joe, Kristen, counselors, librarian, custodians, all of the just infrastructure, utilities, all of those fixed costs, sporting programs, all of those things are part of that $1.75 million. So as we look forward to 2014 and our levy bond measures, we've got three things to consider. One is the bond itself, and right now as we're planning, we're targeting a similar size bond to that of 2010, which was $149.2 million. We're also trying to target a level tax rate so that we don't see a big spike in property taxes for our local voters and taxpayers. But we have three measures we have to fit within that level tax rate. One is a renewal of our educational programs and operations levy, our day-to-day monies. The other is renewal of our capital tech levy, and then a new bond. With a bond perhaps in the $150 million range, knowing that we have 31 schools all at various ages and stages of needing repair and renovation and upgrading, we're likely going to have to reprioritize some of those projects and push them into the future because a new high school is obviously going to take up the lion's share of the bond we would are working towards running in 2014. So what is this what might this look like sort of on a practical level? So this is how we're organized right now with our three comprehensive high schools. So looking at Inglemoor, you're fed by Northshore and Kenmore, and you can see the schools that feed them. Shelton View, some of those kids go over to Kenmore Junior High, some of them go to Canyon Park. You can see Kokanee, the same thing. Some of those students go over to Canyon Park, some of them go over to Leota. But for the most part, the lines are pretty clean. The EDTF had to do some level of feasibility to say, would this even work? Could you build a fourth high school and rearrange feeder patterns and adjust boundaries in order to make this plan happen? So I want to say these are feasibility. No decisions have been made on boundaries. None of this is finalized. This is just the feasibility study of the EDTF in bringing their recommendation forward. Everything with a hashed line around it represents a school in their feasibility study that would see a boundary change. Everything with a solid line is a school that would maintain its current boundaries. So you can see the sort of what the impacts are. You've got Inglemoor still primarily being fed by Northshore and Kenmore. New high school being fed primarily by Skyview and those schools. You've got some of the kids from Kokanee will go up to Leota, but then we'll go back to a new high school. So you can kind of get a sense of what, I mean, this is big. I mean, this would impact a large portion of the district, including many schools that really aren't in that high growth area. Looking at it another way, these are kind of some visual maps that represent the same thing. So the colors are the current service areas of the schools in the north end of the district. And then the red lines represent those feasibility boundaries that the EDTF worked with. So again, none of this is finalized. It's just sort of for the sake of study right now. Take a school like Canyon Creek, the CC, that's the yellow one. So over time, the plan is that we would deal with the enrollment growth at that school in two ways. One is removing sixth graders, and then the second is shrinking the attendance area. So you're trying to serve a smaller geographic area with that particular school and move some of that population off to another school, off to another area that has more capacity. And that being sort of the two-pronged approach that extend the life of that school. This is sort of the junior high look. Again, the dark blue color at the top there would represent a Skyview, not junior high, but a Skyview middle school. Same idea, shrinking that service area a little bit, moving some of that population to other areas, doing some other adjustments with junior highs, or middle schools, excuse me. And then finally, the one that's probably of most interest to you, this is what the overlay looks like with respect to high schools. Again, nothing finalized, just sort of for discussion, you know, would it work purposes. But as you can see, the high school service area most impacted is Bothell, and that makes sense because that's where most of the growth is occurring right now. Potentially some area of impact between Inglemoor and Bothell, Woodinville and the new high school in Bothell. These would all be things studied over time by the EDTF with recommendations coming forward to the board for action. So just process and timeline. Again, the EDTF has been studying this for about 2 years. They made their preliminary recommendation to the board in April, their formal recommendation to the board over the summer. The board spent from August through October studying the recommendation. As I said, in October, they made their decision on the preferred option. We're now in an accelerated planning and permitting process. So we are actually trying to design and permit a new high school so that if or when, hopefully, we pass a bond in February 2014, we're ready to start building as soon as possible. We have to have all of our bond and levy measures finalized by next summer or early fall. Again, if we're successful, we'd start construction right away, and our hope would be that in fall of 2017, we would be in a position to do 3 things at once: open a new high school, reconfigure grades, and implement boundary adjustments. So kind of this, you know, rip off the Band-Aid all at once to make what would be, you know, a generational change across our school district for sure, but to kind of do this all at one time. That gives us lots of time to plan and hopefully be thoughtful about that. Our tentative thinking right now is that if we open a new high school, we would open it with grades 9 and 10 only. So if you're a student that started high school, you would finish high school at that school. You wouldn't have to make a change during high school. And then would grow to 9, 10, and 11 the next year, and then by the second full year, third full year of the school, you'd have all 4 grade levels. So what does this mean sort of at a kid level? And I'm sorry this is a little bit busy chart, but if you look kind of that third column over from the left, that's the 12-13 year and sort of what's the impact to me based on what grade I'm in. So if you're any student from 5th grade up, so 5th through 12th grade, this really means nothing to you. You would likely move through the system and there would be no change, no impact to you. If you are a first grader this year, you would be the first class, assuming everything worked according to this timeline, that would have 6th grade in a middle school in our school district. Likewise, if you're a 4th grader this year, you would be the first class that would have 9th grade in a high school, not in a junior high. So, some parallel processes. What other things do we need to be thinking about and doing between now and 2017? Obviously, the levy bond planning, that's actively underway right now, I spoke about. The EDTF, that would be the group that would be looking at boundaries, both for a new high school and balancing enrollment across schools. They also need to be looking at program as they do that. Where do we put things like our EAP program or PACE or special ed programs, because those influence the capacities at schools. I would foresee us having some kind of high school task force. What does it mean to have a four-year high school, particularly for the ninth grade experience? I think we have an opportunity to do this thoughtfully and well, and not just presume that we can bring ninth graders up and we don't need to give much thought to it, but really, what does it mean to have a four-year high school in a district that's never had one? What do we want the new academic identity of a new high school to look like? I mean, that's a unique opportunity to create something from scratch that's compelling and interesting to people in that part of the district or across the district. And then how do we lead that transition? Same with the middle school task force, and this may be the biggest philosophical group to get a hold of. How are middle schools fundamentally different than junior high schools? And what does that look like for us? And how do we make that experience and that transition in a thoughtful and meaningful way? And finally, at elementaries, what does it mean to be K-5 as opposed to K-6? Special programs, we'll have to think about that, not only just our special education programs, but other programs like EAP and PACE and all that. How do we place them across the district so we have good access for people for various choice programs that they might be interested in? HR, obviously if you're a 6th grade teacher or you're a 9th grade teacher, you might be thinking, what's this going to mean for me, you know? So that whole process of figuring out what does staffing look like in a K-5, 6, 8, 9, 12 school. How do we go through that process of sort of reconfiguring our staff to meet that grade configuration? How do we get staff assignments done in a way that's both respectful to employees, that's collaborative with our association, that conforms with our contract language? How do we know that we've got the right contract language? We probably need to look at that to make sure we've got adequate provision to get this all done. But mostly, how do we do it in a thoughtful way so we get people in the right places where they can be successful, and do it in a timely manner so that people can wrap their heads around the idea of change? Business services, you know, a new high school, any new school adds to your costs as a school district, so we've got to be thinking over the next several years how we're going to fund the $1.75 million annual ongoing costs of operating a new high school. There's also a lot of potentially one-time costs associated with transitioning, outfitting a whole school's worth of sports teams, paying for folks to move classrooms, all of those things that are just one-time costs that we need to be planning for as well. And finally, our capital projects, our support services group. This is the group that actually will facilitate the design and the permit, and dependent on a successful bond, will then lead the construction of a new school. And transition planning. You know, we don't want to be thinking that everybody just is going to embrace change and it's going to be smooth for everybody. You know, what does it mean to go K-6, K-5, junior highs? We're going to have boundary changes, people be changing schools, staff changing schools, all of those kinds of things. So how do we make sure that we can do that in a thoughtful way? How do we help our district leaders be able to work in their local communities in a way that they can help facilitate that process along? So, in summary, growth in the north end, central part of the district, is the big issue. New high school, grade reconfiguration, boundary adjustments are the board solutions, and it's a package, not individual pieces. All of those pieces have to work together to create a solution. You can't just say we'll adjust boundaries, but we won't do the other two. You can't just say we'll do a new high school, but we won't do the other two. It all has to work together. I think our board has done a thoughtful job of basing this decision on what's best for all kids instructionally, educationally. It's all dependent on a future bond. We've got 4 to 5 years to thoughtfully plan for it. And sometime along that way, we're going to have to address the issue of school consolidation.